Eleanor Thompson pulled the final fabric of the glove tight against Lily's wrist and stepped back to look at her daughter. The words came out quiet and steady, like she was talking about the morning rain. She told Lily that she would embarrass the family at the gala. Lily looked at her own face in the tall glass mirror. The dark green dress was tailored well, and the small silver chain at her neck belonged to her grandmother. Her brown hair sat in neat pins, arranged by the housemaids over 2 hours. By the look of it, she belonged to a family of wealth and standing in their small town of Pinecrest, Vermont. Yet none of it felt real, because her mother's voice stayed in her ears. The words hovered in the air between them, heavy and familiar. Lily lowered her chin toward her chest and promised to be careful this time. Eleanor let out a short breath and smoothed the lace on Lily's sleeve. She reminded Lily that she had said the exact same thing at the spring dinner. The bedroom became perfectly still. Lily felt the familiar tightness starting in her stomach, the same pressure she felt before every party, every greeting, and every chance to let people down. Her mother adjusted a small fold near Lily's shoulder. She stated that the Whitlock Winter Gala was the most critical gathering of the entire year, and every family in the county would attend. Lily nodded her head and murmured that she understood. Eleanor told her to remember that every move she made reflected on their name. Then she turned and walked out of the room. Lily stood by the mirror for a long time after the door clicked shut. The hardest part was not that her mother expected her to fail. The hardest part was that Lily believed she would too. 7 years before this night, Lily Thompson was a completely different person. At 15, she spoke with a loud voice, laughed without covering her mouth, and filled the rooms of their house with stories. She liked reading books, she liked listening to music, and she liked being around neighbors. Most importantly, she never worried about making a wrong move. Then the evening of the piano performance arrived. It was a small party held right inside their own living room, with friends, neighbors, and a few local business owners. Lily spent 4 weeks practicing a difficult song. The music flowed beautifully until the final part of the piece. She struck one wrong note, got confused, and missed the next 3. Her face turned bright red as she finished the song and stood up from the bench. Looking back at that day, it was not a true disaster. A few guests even patted her shoulder and praised her effort afterward. Most people forgot the mistake before they even finished their dinner, but Eleanor did not forget. That night, after the front door closed behind the last guest, Eleanor stood in the empty music room and looked at her daughter. She asked Lily if she understood how humiliating the performance had been. Lily blinked her eyes and replied that it was just a simple mistake. Her mother countered that people always remember mistakes, adding that Lily looked completely unprepared. Lily remembered standing by the piano, feeling lost because nobody else seemed angry. Her mother looked personally hurt, as though Lily had done something to her on purpose. That was the first time Lily realized that affection depended on being perfect. 2 years after the piano incident, the town held a charity dinner. Lily accidentally bumped a table and spilled a cup of warm tea onto the dress of a local mayor's wife. She apologized right away, and the woman laughed it off, saying it did not matter at all. The problem seemed fixed to Lily, but the carriage ride home lasted for 40 minutes. Her mother spent 35 of those minutes talking about the spilled tea. She told Lily that she always managed to draw attention for the wrong reasons. Lily looked out the window at the dark trees and whispered that it was an accident. Her mother answered that accidents still had results. And when Lily noted the woman was not angry, Eleanor said that was not the point. Lily never forgot those words. The accident itself never mattered to her mother, only how it made the family look to the neighbors. By the time Lily turned 19, going out to meet people felt like walking into a trap. Every single conversation felt like a mistake waiting to happen, and every dance felt like an invitation to be laughed at. Then the town winter dance arrived. While moving across the floor, Lily accidentally stepped on her partner's shoe. The young man laughed, and a few people nearby laughed along with him. It was a light, harmless moment that everyone forgot within 5 minutes, except Eleanor. That night, her mother spoke the words that changed Lily's life for the next few years. She softly suggested that social events were simply not suited for Lily. The tone was quiet and almost kind, which made the words cut even deeper. Lily stopped accepting invitations after that night. When letters arrived at the house, Lily wrote back to decline them. When gatherings happened down the road, she stayed in her room. 3 years went by without her leaving the property lines. The townspeople slowly stopped mentioning her name, and some neighbors figured she was dealing with a long illness. Others thought she had simply become a lonely recluse who hated the town. A few people just stopped asking about her entirely. It felt much easier for Lily to live that way because it was safe. She stayed hidden until this specific winter evening, the night of the Whitlock Winter Gala. It was the biggest event the town of Pinecrest had seen in 10 years, hosted by the wealthy Whitlock family at their estate on the hill. Attendance was mandatory for everyone. Her mother had stood at her doorway the week before and told her that people were asking questions, so she had to be seen. An hour later, the family carriage joined the long line of vehicles moving up the snowy driveway toward the Whitlock estate. Bright yellow light poured out from dozens of tall glass windows, and the sound of string instruments floated into the cold night air. Workers in dark coats hurried to help guests out of their carriages. Everywhere Lily looked, she saw people who looked completely sure of themselves. Beautiful women walked up the stone steps, and men in fine suits laughed together. Her younger sister Daisy looked perfectly calm as she smoothed her hair. Daisy reached over, touched Lily's arm, and told her to relax because everything would be fine. Lily gave her a small, weak smile. Daisy meant well, but kindness was not the same thing as understanding the weight in Lily's chest. The main hall of the Whitlock estate was enormous. Huge glass light fixtures hung from the ceiling, throwing a warm glow over the polished floor. Expensive dresses shifted through the room like moving flowers under the candlelight, and a large group of musicians played near the back wall. The sounds of voices mixed together until they felt like a heavy wave of noise. There were too many faces, too much movement, and too much sound for Lily to take in at once. She felt her heart beat faster against her ribs. Her mother leaned close and whispered for her to put a smile on her face, because people were watching them enter. Lily forced her lips to move upward immediately. The party officially began for her, and she tried her best to blend into the background. For the first hour, things went better than Lily expected. She shook hands with 3 neighbors, nodded during a conversation about the winter weather, and managed to answer 2 questions without losing her voice. She started to think that maybe tonight would turn out differently, and perhaps she had spent days worrying about nothing at all. Then she walked near a decorative pillar and heard 2 older women talking on the other side. Neither of them knew Lily was standing close enough to catch their words. One woman asked if the girl in the green dress was Lily Thompson. The second woman replied that she believed it was, then noted how strange it was, since Lily had not been seen at a public gathering in years. They moved away toward the punch bowl, their talk lasting less than 10 seconds, but the words stayed with Lily. Across the crowded room, Eleanor noticed the look on Lily's face and walked over immediately. She asked what was wrong, and Lily replied that nothing had happened. Eleanor lowered her voice to a sharp whisper and told her daughter not to start acting up tonight. The familiar knot in Lily's stomach grew tighter and heavier than before. She looked out at the crowded floor, where dozens of couples were turning to the music. She looked at the impossible standards she felt she had to carry into every room she entered. For the first time that night, she wondered if her mother was entirely right about her. Maybe she truly did not belong in a room like this, among people who never seemed to stumble or fail. Lily spent the next hour doing exactly what she had practiced doing for years at home. She smiled whenever someone looked her way, nodded her head when a neighbor spoke, and let out soft laughs at jokes she did not really listen to. Most of the guests treated her politely, and a few were genuinely sweet. Yet every single interaction felt like walking across a frozen lake with thin ice beneath her shoes. One bad step, one long pause, or one wrong word would be enough to break through. Across the room, her mother moved easily from one group of town leaders to another. Daisy danced 3 separate times with 3 different young men, then disappeared into a crowd of people who seemed to admire her. Lily did not feel jealous of her sister. She just felt incredibly tired of trying. She took a glass of sparkling cider from a passing worker and walked toward a dark corner near the side doors. For a few minutes, she did not try to talk to anyone. She just watched the couples move under the lights, while laughter drifted across the room. The musicians changed their tune to a slower, quieter song. The whole scene looked like a painting, and everyone else seemed to know exactly where their feet belonged. Then a young man walked over to her corner. He was dressed in a fine black suit, and his hair was brushed back neatly. Lily recognized him from a town gathering years ago. He greeted her politely and said it was wonderful to see her out in public again. Lily kept her polite smile in place and thanked him. The young man remarked that people had been wondering where she had been hiding herself for the last few years. The comment was meant to be a light joke, but the word hiding felt like a physical strike against her chest. Lily replied that she had been nowhere interesting, and the young man laughed. He told her she must forgive the townspeople because everyone gets curious when someone disappears from view. Lily nodded her head, hoping the conversation would end right there. Instead, the man added that some neighbors had assumed she had left the county completely. The smile on Lily's face began to slip away, and she could only say that she understood. The young man saw her expression shift, looked a bit uncomfortable, and muttered that he did not mean anything bad by it. Lily told him it was perfectly fine, but inside, it did not feel fine at all. She knew he was telling her the absolute truth about how the town saw her. People had simply forgotten she existed, and the thought hurt more than she wanted to admit. The young man excused himself a minute later to find his friends. Lily stayed in the corner by herself. The heavy weight in her stomach returned, bigger and colder than before. She looked through the crowd to find her mother, who was currently laughing with a wealthy landowner. Daisy stood right next to her, looking bright and happy. Neither of them looked back toward Lily. A worker carrying a high metal tray passed by her corner. Another guest turned around quickly and bumped into the worker's shoulder. A few glass cups rattled together with a sharp, ringing noise. The sudden sound made Lily jump, and her breath caught in her throat. Her heart began to race fast. She looked past the crowd toward the grand exit doors. She thought that if she could just get 5 minutes of fresh air outside, her hands would stop shaking. She began to push her way carefully through the edges of the crowd. She took one step, then another, telling herself to breathe deeply. But the room seemed to get louder with every step she took. The music, the talking, and the footsteps all mixed into one giant roar. Lily's hands started to tremble under her green fabric gloves. It was not enough for the guests to see yet, but she could feel the shaking in her fingers. She walked faster toward the doors, telling herself the exit was just a few feet away. Then her mother's voice cut through the noise right beside her. Eleanor asked her where she thought she was going. Lily froze on the spot. Her mother had stepped out from behind a group of guests to block her path. Lily whispered that she just needed a brief moment outside for some fresh air. Eleanor frowned immediately and whispered sharply that people would notice her leaving alone. Lily felt a sudden rush of heat climb up into her cheeks and face. She begged her mother to let her go for just a moment, promising she would not be long. She asked her mother not to start an argument tonight. The words felt heavier than they should have, because suddenly Lily felt like she was 15 again, standing by that quiet piano. She felt like she was 17, sitting in the dark carriage after spilling the tea. She felt like she was 19, listening to her mother explain why she did not fit into normal society. Years of sharp remarks and cold looks seemed to come together inside her head all at once. Lily whispered that she was trying her best. Her mother let out a heavy sigh and told her to try harder. Something inside Lily broke quietly, the way things break after years of being pushed too hard. She turned her face away before Eleanor could see the tears coming to her eyes. The side exit was only a few steps away from where they stood. She told herself she could make it if she just moved fast and left without making a scene. Then a worker carrying a tall, multi-tiered display of glass cider cups stepped directly into her path from the kitchen hallway. The worker tried to shift to the left to avoid her. Lily shifted to the left at the exact same moment. The worker moved to the right, and Lily did the same. For 1 second they both stopped and stared at each other. Then the worker's foot slipped on a patch of melted snow near the door, and the heavy metal tray tilted sideways. Time seemed to slow down to a crawl. One glass fell off the edge, then another, then the entire structure went down. The tower of glass collapsed onto the hard floor. The sound of breaking glass filled the room, and dark apple cider splashed across the floor and the bottom of Lily's green dress. The musicians stopped playing their instruments immediately. Every conversation in the room died out in an instant. Hundreds of guests turned their heads toward the sound. A heavy, complete silence fell over the grand hall. Lily stood completely still in the middle of the mess. Her greatest fear had just taken place right in front of everyone. Every single eye in the room was fixed on her. Somewhere near her shoe, one small glass cup continued to roll across the floor until it hit a table leg with a small click. The sound felt incredibly loud in the quiet room. Nobody moved, and nobody said a word for several seconds. Then the whispers started. They were small at first, just a few murmurs near the back, but they spread quickly through the crowd. Lily felt her throat close up. She could not get enough air into her lungs. She could not think of a single word to say, and her feet felt like they were glued to the floor. The worker got down on his knees right away and began picking up pieces, telling her he was incredibly sorry. Lily knew it was not entirely her fault. The worker had slipped, and it was just a bad accident. But her mind did not care about logic right now, because years of fear were staring her right in the face, proven completely true. Then Eleanor walked through the crowd and stood before her daughter. The entire room watched the two women. For one brief moment, Lily hoped for something impossible. She hoped her mother would ask if she was cut by the glass. She hoped her mother would put an arm around her shoulder. She hoped her mother would finally care about her comfort instead of what the neighbors thought. Instead, Eleanor closed her eyes, shook her head, and whispered that this was exactly what she had been afraid of. There was no worry in her mother's voice, no attempt to comfort her, only deep embarrassment. Lily felt a strange numbness spread from her chest down to her toes. Around them, the guests looked away and pretended they were not listening, which only made the moment feel worse. Daisy appeared beside Eleanor a moment later and suggested quietly that maybe Lily should go home in the small carriage. Daisy meant to help, but hearing the words spoken out loud felt like another blow. Lily was being told to leave, to disappear, and to go back into hiding. Lily nodded her head slowly and whispered that her sister was right. Her own voice sounded strange to her ears. She turned around and walked out the glass doors into the night. Nobody tried to stop her from leaving. Nobody followed her down the steps, and nobody called out her name. The crowd in the hall watched her go until the heavy wooden doors shut behind her. A few moments passed in silence. Then the people slowly went back to their conversations. The musicians started playing a new song, and the couples returned to the floor. The party went right back to life like nothing had happened at all. Everyone seemed glad that the strange scene was over and done with. Everyone except for one person. Standing near the center of the hall, the host of the party, James Whitlock, looked toward the closed doors where Lily had vanished. He looked at the broken glass, then at Eleanor and Daisy, his face completely expressionless. Outside the house, the winter air was freezing, but Lily barely felt the cold against her bare neck. She walked down the stone path and sat on a wooden bench that faced the frozen garden beds. Her own thoughts were louder than the music inside the house had been. For 7 years, she had done everything she could to avoid bringing shame to her family name. She had weighed every single word before speaking, watched every step she took, and forced herself to smile when she wanted to cry. And tonight, despite all that effort, she had still failed completely. She let out a short, sad laugh into the dark. She thought that maybe her mother had been right about her from the very start. The sound of boots crunching on the snow interrupted her thoughts. Lily quickly used the back of her glove to wipe the tears from her face. She expected to see a worker coming to tell her the carriage was ready, or perhaps Daisy coming to say goodbye. The last person she expected to see was James Whitlock himself. He stopped 5 feet away from her bench, giving her plenty of room. He stood under the moonlight, and Lily noticed for the first time how unusual he looked. His hair was completely white, like fresh snow, and his skin was incredibly pale, almost translucent in the nightlight. He kept his hands in his pockets and asked quietly if he could sit down beside her. Lily stared up at him in surprise and told him that he should be inside his own house. James looked back at the glowing windows of the mansion where the faint sound of music was still playing. He answered that perhaps he should be, but the party would go on without him anyway. He sat down on the far end of the long bench. Neither of them spoke for a couple of minutes. The quiet between them did not feel awkward. It actually felt peaceful compared to the noise inside. Lily shook her head after a while and told him again that he really should not be out here with her. James looked up at the winter stars and asked her why he shouldn't be. Lily explained that all the important people of the town were inside the ballroom waiting for the host. James turned his head to look at her, his pale face sharp in the moonlight, and said that was exactly why he preferred to be outside. Lily looked at him, completely unsure of what to say next. James looked back toward the dark trees at the edge of the property and asked her what she thought he had seen in the hall tonight. Lily let out a soft breath and said that he had seen a woman make a total fool of herself in front of the whole town. James shook his head and said that was not what he saw at all. Lily felt her chest tighten as she asked him what he meant. James stated that he saw a room full of people who cared more about a few broken pieces of glass than another human being. The words felt strange and warm as they settled into her mind. James went on to say that he saw a young woman apologize for an accident that was clearly not her fault. Lily looked down at her boots and muttered that the glasses had still broken because of her. James replied that glass could be bought again any day of the week. Lily swallowed hard and told him that her mother would never look at it that way. James remained silent for a short moment, then asked if her mother had always treated her this way. Lily let out another short laugh, though there was no joy in it. She asked him which part of her mother's behavior he was talking about. James did not give an answer, and Lily realized he did not need to. She looked out over the snowy garden beds. For years, she had kept her mother's secrets, made excuses for her cold words, and tried to justify her actions to herself. But tonight, she felt too tired to carry the secret by herself any longer. So she began to talk. She told this white-haired stranger about the piano recital when she was 15, the spilled tea at 17, and the dance at 19. She told him about every single warning, every word of criticism, and every look of disappointment she had received over the years. She explained how she had been made to feel like a broken object that needed to be hidden away from the world. James listened to every word without cutting in or moving away. When she finally ran out of words and fell silent, he stayed quiet for a few moments, letting the night air clear between them. Then he asked her a very simple question. He asked if anyone had ever told her that none of those accidents were her fault. Lily turned her head to look at him, feeling confused by the question. James looked straight into her eyes and asked if anyone had ever told her that making a mistake was just a normal part of being alive. Lily shook her head slowly. He asked about the tea incident, and she shook her head again. He mentioned the dance, and Lily felt the tears starting to come back to her eyes as she whispered no. James nodded his head, not because he was shocked, but because he finally understood the whole story. He told her that he would be the first person to tell her then. Lily stared at him as his voice dropped lower, telling her that one single accident did not decide who a person was. Something inside Lily melted quietly, like winter ice turning to water. The weeks that followed that night changed the routine of the Thompson household. The changes did not happen fast or with a great deal of noise, but they happened steadily. James Whitlock began riding his horse down the hill to visit their home. The first time he arrived, He claimed he wanted to talk to Lily's father about the town's winter wood supply. The second time, he stated he needed to discuss the local school funds. By the third visit, even Eleanor stopped pretending to believe his reasons for stopping by. Everyone in the house knew exactly why the wealthy man was sitting in their parlor. He came to see Lily. More importantly, he came because he seemed to truly like spending hours in her company. James quickly discovered that Lily had a sharp mind, a quick sense of humor, and a deep understanding of the books she read. She could talk about the history of the county for an hour, and she remembered small details about the townspeople that everyone else overlooked. She was completely different from the awkward, broken girl that the neighbors imagined her to be. Lily began to realize that the real tragedy was not a lack of ability on her part. The real tragedy was that her own family had spent years convincing her that she had no value at all. During these long afternoon visits, Lily began to notice things about James that separated him from the other men in town. His skin remained completely white, even when the winter sun hit his face through the parlor windows. His hands were always cold to the touch, like stones taken from a winter river, and he never poured himself a cup of warm tea or touched the small cakes her mother set out on the table. He moved through the house with a strange, silent grace that made no sound on the wooden floorboards. One evening, when the lamps were low, she saw his eyes catch the light in a way that looked almost silver. He did not hide his true nature from her when they sat alone by the fireplace. He told her quietly that his family had lived on the hill for a very long time, much longer than the town records showed. He explained that he did not see the world the way mortal men did, and he spent most of his time in the dark because the sun tired his eyes. He did not use frightening words or speak of dark legends, but Lily understood what he was telling her. He was the king of his kind, a creature of the night, living in a human town. Yet, when he looked at her, his pale face held nothing but gentleness. He treated her like she was the most precious thing in the room. One sunny afternoon in early spring, nearly 3 months after the night of the gala, James invited Lily to take a walk through the gardens of his estate. The thick winter snow had finally started to melt away, leaving patches of wet green grass on the hills. Small blue flowers were beginning to peek through the dark soil near the stone walls. They walked together until they reached a stone fountain near the center of the grounds, surrounded by rows of white rose bushes that were just starting to grow leaves. Lily noticed that James seemed unusually quiet, his pale fingers tapping against his coat pocket as they stood by the water. Lily stopped walking and asked him what was on his mind, noting that he looked almost nervous. James let out a soft, low laugh and admitted that she was very good at reading him. He looked down at the stone path and said that he was indeed feeling a bit shaken. The admission surprised Lily because she had never seen him look anything less than completely calm and sure of himself. Before she could ask him what was causing his worry, James reached into his dark coat pocket and pulled out a small black box made of soft velvet material. Lily stopped breathing for a second, and the entire garden seemed to fall perfectly silent around them. James pressed the small latch on the box, and the lid sprang open to reveal a silver ring with a clear stone that caught the morning light. Lily felt the familiar sting of tears behind her eyes as she looked at the ring, then up at his white hair and pale face. She whispered his name, her voice trembling in the quiet air. James took a slow, deep breath and reminded her of the first night he had truly seen her. He recalled how she had been standing in his hall, believing she had brought shame to everyone around her. Lily's vision became blurry with tears, but she managed to nod her head and say that she remembered that night perfectly. James stepped a bit closer, his silver-colored eyes locked onto hers, and stated that the only people who should have felt ashamed that night were the ones who made her feel like an outsider in her own town. The tears began to run down Lily's cheeks now, but she did not turn away from him. James smiled gently and told her that for 7 long years she had been carrying the weight of small mistakes that should have been forgotten in a single day. He added that she had spent so much of her life worrying about letting other people down that she had forgotten one very important truth. Lily cleared her throat and whispered to ask him what that truth was. James reached out and took her hand, his cold fingers wrapping gently around her warm wrist. He told her that she was never the disappointment in that story. The tears came faster now, and Lily let out a small, shaky sob that she could not hold back. James gave a short, quiet laugh and admitted that he had written out a much longer speech in his head before they walked out here. Lily laughed through her tears and told him that she had figured as much. James then dropped down onto one knee on the damp grass, looking up at her with a steady expression. He asked Lily Thompson if she would do him the honor of becoming his wife. Lily looked down at the white-haired man kneeling before her on the ground. She thought about how he had chosen to look at her when everyone else was staring at a mess on the floor. She thought about how he had walked out of his own party just to sit with her in the freezing cold because her safety mattered more to him than the opinions of the town leaders. The answer to his question had been growing inside her heart for 3 months. She cleared her wet eyes, looked right into his pale face, and told him yes. James smiled, his whole face softening as he took the silver ring from the box and slipped it onto her finger. A sudden sound of hands clapping together came from the path behind the rose bushes. Lily turned around in shock, her hand still resting in James's cold grip. Her father was standing near the edge of the stone wall with a wide smile on his face. Beside him stood Daisy, who was clapping her hands happily, along with 2 of their close neighbors and a couple of the houseworkers. Everyone was smiling and shouting their congratulations into the spring air. Then Lily's eyes moved past her sister to the back of the group, where Eleanor was standing by herself under the shade of a tall tree. Eleanor Thompson stood perfectly still, her hands folded over her dress. There were actual tears in her mother's eyes, but for the first time in Lily's memory, her face did not hold any signs of anger, judgment, or disappointment. There was only a quiet look of deep regret as she watched her daughter stand with the white-haired master of the estate. Later that same evening, after the neighbors had gone inside to drink cider, Eleanor walked over to the fountain to speak with Lily alone. She stood by the water for a minute, looking down at the small blue flowers, before she admitted that she had spent years trying to protect the family name from the neighbors. Her mother's voice shook as she spoke, and she looked up to admit that she had never realized she was breaking her own daughter's spirit while trying to protect their reputation. Lily did not say anything back to her. She just listened to the quiet sound of the fountain water hitting the basin. Eleanor used a lace handkerchief to wipe her damp eyes and told Lily that she was truly sorry for the years of cold words. Lily knew that a few words could not wipe out 7 years of hiding in her room, but the apology still mattered to her because she could tell it was completely honest. As the sun began to go down behind the hills of Pinecrest, throwing long purple shadows across the grass, Lily stood by the stone wall and looked at the people gathered on the porch of the great house. She looked down at the bright silver ring resting against her skin. For a very long time, she had gone to sleep believing that her greatest failure was not being perfect enough for her mother and the town. Now, as she felt the cool evening breeze against her face, she understood the real truth of her life. Her biggest mistake had been giving away her own peace of mind to people who only cared about appearances. Lily looked out toward the dark woods where the night was beginning to fall, feeling the steady presence of the man who stood right beside her shoulder. She knew that her future would be different from anything she had planned, filled with the mysteries of his long, silent world. But she did not feel the old shaking in her hands anymore, and the heavy knot in her stomach was completely gone. She had found a place where she did not have to watch every step or hide her true thoughts from the light. She was finally content to be exactly who she was, stepping forward into the quiet dark without any fear of the path ahead. The sky over the Vermont hills turned a deep, quiet blue as the last bits of daylight disappeared behind the mountains. Lily leaned her arms against the stone railing of the terrace, watching the first stars appear in the clear night sky. James stood a couple of steps behind her, his white hair catching the faint silver light of the rising moon, his presence a silent comfort in the cool air. Looking out over the dark valley and the small lights of the town below, Lily found herself thinking about the years that lay ahead of them. The old fears that used to fill her mind seemed very far away now, like old stories about someone else she used to know. She realized that the world was much larger than the small rooms she had hidden herself in, and the opinions of the townspeople seemed small and unimportant from up here on the hill. She knew that her life with James would be different from the lives of her neighbors, filled with long walks in the quiet hours and secrets that belonged only to the two of them. Yet, there was an incredible peace in knowing that she no longer had to earn the right to be cared for by being flawless. She had spent so many years trying to measure up to a standard that did not really matter, forgetting that real affection does not keep a list of mistakes or count the times a person stumbles. As she watched the moon rise higher over the pine trees, Lily felt a deep warmth spread through her chest, completely pushing out the old coldness of her doubts. She turned her head slightly to look at James, whose pale eyes were already fixed on her face with that same quiet look of total acceptance. She took a deep breath of the crisp night air, closed her eyes for a brief moment, and smiled to herself as she thought about tomorrow, completely ready for whatever the dark might bring. The opinions that cause us the most pain throughout our lives are often the ones we mistakenly choose to give the most power over our hearts. If this story brought a sense of peace to your day, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and please consider subscribing to the channel to join us for more gentle stories of healing and devotion.